Looks like we have a wide range of how long we participated and a little bit of everything that we've done. So go ahead, Alexa.
I am the 4-H. I was the 4-H meeting.
Awesome. So we are glad to have you guys. I know it's small tonight, but that's really good. So with all of our guest speakers tonight, you'll be able to ask some good questions, and feel free to make this symposium what's most helpful for you. So feel free to ask questions to any of our guest speakers and feel comfortable with all of us. So just to give you guys a flow of how the next 2 nights is going to go. So our full agenda for tonight is we are going to talk with our wonderful judge, Ms. Jennifer Sawyer. She is going to give you a real judge's perspective, as well as some tips for improving your showing, how to get into judging as a career path, and a little bit of what she's seeing as industry trends. Because we know in the horse world, trends are constantly changing. So it's better to hear it from someone who's in the industry rather than just random people. And then afterwards, we're going to have our genetics talk with our Brooks Genetics Lab. So we have several people coming from that lab. And they're going to talk about all the latest technology and recent research done in genetics. And so horse genetics is pretty cool. So with that, I'm going to go ahead and turn it over to Miss Jennifer. Oh, and in the meantime, if you guys haven't met me before yet, I am Miss Kelsey. I am your current chair of Area North this year. So if you see me at the show or any of the events, please say hi to me. I love hanging out with you guys. So just so that you know who the face has been talking to is, I'm really bad about introducing myself.
And Miss Kelsey always has a smile on her face every time I see her. Always. She's just a wonderful girl. Look at her smiling. Well, I'm Jennifer Sawyer, and those of you that don't know me, I am a carded judge. I am a career judge of, gosh, I'm afraid to admit it, 32 years this year. I've judged over 500 shows throughout the United States and internationally in my career. And I have cards with a various group of breeds, Pinto, Buckskin, Pony of the Americas, some of my fun ones, Gypsy Vanner, and Miniature Donkey. So I see a lot of different horses throughout the year. A lot of my work is through the 4-H, both for UF here at home, but I also do a lot of work for the University of Kentucky in the summer, as well as Michigan and New York, where I'm originally from. I am a college graduate in equine. I have an associate's degree in equine husbandry and management from the State University of New York at Morrisville. Go Mustangs, and I'm very proud of that as well. And I do fall back a lot on my college education throughout the years and throughout my career. So I think that what you guys are doing with continuing your education with horses is just a super thing. I mean, that's really, Kelsey, you talked about starting as a judge. I had been a team member, and I know many of you are team members of 4-H judging teams, but I have been a team member in the past with the Arabian Club in New York. Back in the 80s, our 4-H horse judging was just really starting to take off. There wasn't a whole lot of it available then, but our Arabian Club was very, very well recognized. So I joined them in the mid 80s. I think I was 14 or 15 when I started with them. And then that progressed into college, and I was on the college team and so forth, and took the judging classes in college. So I think for you guys, both as exhibitors and as the potential judging team members, that is absolutely the way to get started in the judging area. And you can decide a lot from doing that, whether it interests you and where it will take you. Are you interested in hunter jumper? Are you interested in dressage? Are you interested in ranch? Are you interested in Western pleasure? What are you interested in? And I think as a judge, that's so important. You need to have an area that, you show yourself, you're familiar with, and you enjoy. Because it's a big commitment. You guys all know just horses period is a huge commitment. And judging takes up the majority of my career. I also train. I have a clientele of 12 people that show. We show AQHA, American Ranch Horse, and paint. And then I also, of course, do many, many clinics, and I do a lot of things like this as well. But the judging does take up a lot of your time, so you do want to be committed to it, if that's your interest. How many of you out there are on judging teams? I bet you a lot of you guys are. Yeah, and it's a lot of fun. I really enjoy the contests. I have worked the contest here in Florida. I've worked the contest in all those states I mentioned, and I've been an official for the Eastern National 5 or 6 times. And it's just always awesome to see you guys out there rocking it, talking about what you enjoy and loving the horses. And again, remember, as a horse judging member, it's not up to you to say you need to match the officials' placings exactly. It's up to you to say, well, I saw this a little differently, and this is why. And this is what makes us all different. If we all agreed on the same stuff with all horses, then they would just have a computer judge every horse show, and that would be it. It would always be the same. But because we see things differently, we have different backgrounds and different opinions on things. That's why reasons are wonderful. And I'm sure there's some of you out there just groaning about giving reasons, including Miss Kelsey. I always did back in the day. But that's a lot of what develops you as a horsewoman or a horseman, as well as being able to talk from your perspective. So I think keep that in mind for those of you that do that. Don't be groaning when you hear what the officials' placings were. Think, well, okay, I saw this a little differently, so now I'm going to talk about what I saw. And you can very easily be the top competitor in the contest just because you could look me in the eye and talk to me about what you saw in the horse show. So I think horse judging as well, no matter what level you participate in it, makes you a better exhibitor, because you do get to see things from the inside. And if you guys ask Miss Kelsey, she has scribed for me. She has helped me at several events that we did up at Appy Acres over the past few years. And she said numerous times, it's so different when you are on the inside than standing on the rail or being in the arena as an exhibitor. So I'm going to encourage you guys, I'm looking at your survey, and it's like one of the questions was, Kelsey, was something about, were you a crew member? And like nobody answered that. I'm like, oh, we need the crew. But get in the ring and help. If you have the opportunity to ring steward, work a gate, scribe for a judge, go do that, because that is invaluable experience that you guys will get. And it doesn't matter what type of horse show it is. It could be something that you guys have no interest in. We could be talking about roping or reining or dressage, and you guys are Western people or whatever it might be. Get out there and do that, because for me, that was something else I did as a youth. Whenever I had the chance to go volunteer and go help at any horse show I went to, I was jumping in the ring. So get out there and have the chance to do that. And gosh, if I could count all the kids that help me every year all across the country, I have a lot of fun with them. It's wonderful stuff, and it will make you, like I said earlier, a better exhibitor, because you're hearing the judge speaking about what they're seeing in real time and their experiences and all those things that you can't put a price on that. So I think that's my little spiel on judging. A lot of travel, so you do get to see the country, and you do get to meet a lot of interesting people if that's something you pursue. If you guys are interested in judging, most associations, including 4-H, we require you to be 21 before you can do that. But of course, you can be on a judging team all the way up through your collegiate years in college. So you also have that option, and you have the option of volunteering. Kelsey and I were talking about area and how the college students are going to come help out judging trail and doing some other things. You will have opportunities to volunteer judge some different rings, some trail competitions, some smaller shows before you can officially be a carded judge. And so you'll have opportunities right up through that time period. So jump out there and do it. Come help us at area if you're not showing. So let's talk about industry standards a little bit. You guys are here, expanding your education, doing this Zoom this evening on a beautiful night here in Florida. And I took 2 trips in the past 2 months to continue my education with my breed cards. I went to the Color Breed Council Judges Conference in Tulsa in January. That was attended by approximately 1,500 judges from all over the world with all different cards. And it's 5 days of intense learning. So I have lots of information from that one. And then the end of this past month, I attended the national conference in Fort Worth for the Gypsy Vanner Horse Association, who I'm also carded with. And that was judges again from the US, from Europe, from Italy, from Canada, from all over that are licensed with that breed. So this educational stuff's wonderful, because now it's my opportunity to pass that down to you. Well, so Kelsey, can you access any of those pictures I sent you? Let's see if you can give me some stuff to talk with here. I'm gonna be technology at its best. I'm not
Let me try to
really
pull up some stuff for you.
okay. Just pick any of them, whatever you got. And I will tell you guys as we go, if you think of anything you want to ask, I see all your, when you speak, it shows up on my screen as a co-host. If there's a question you come up with or something you want to ask, just, pop it right up there, and it can be about anything, about an individual class, how it's judged, different things like that as we go, the scoring systems, all those things, because there's so much in it. Just feel free to ask me. You can pick my brain while we're here at any time on any of those things. I think the number one thing with competition in any aspect with horses is be prepared. And our time is so limited because we have so many things going on in our lives. We're doing sports, we're doing jobs, we're doing horses, we're doing school. There's always a million things. But, putting that time in with your horse is so important. And it shows as a judge if you've done that. If you've been out in the barn, if you put your time in the class you compete in, if you put your time in the classes that you don't like, but you're still showing them, like showmanship or trail or whatever it might be. Dad says, well, if you're going to horse show, you're going to do showmanship. Oh man, I guess I better practice. It shows, and it makes a difference in your confidence level, in your connection with your horse, because you have prepared your horse as well, mentally and physically, and in the way you perform, whatever the class might be, because you put the time in to rehearse a little bit, if you will. If you're riding in Western pleasure, you've worked on transitions, the walk, jog, and the lope. You've worked on control. You've worked on the frame of the horse, collection, quality of performance, all those things that we look at. If you're performing in showmanship, you've worked on patterns. You've practiced the setup and inspection. You've worked on your turns and your backing and all that stuff. So preparation's important. And I found with my clients, when they journal, or they make a calendar or they have a little book, whatever they use, that they write down what they've done with their horse. And I don't even care if it just says, today is Tuesday. I did 15 minutes of showmanship. I rode for 30 minutes and I worked on, ground poles, and I worked on bending, and I worked on my canter transitions. And then at least you have a journal that tells you what you've trained on and, what you might be working toward. And video too is just as important. I'm really into the video aspect. Get somebody to film you riding. And then you can go back and compare that. I had a client the other day that was really, really super, super, so confident in what she was doing. And she says to me, I'm not real happy with how things are going. I said, we need to go back and look at video from 6 months ago. And you need to see exactly what I'm seeing and how you were riding 6 months ago. And what a difference. When we went back and looked at that video, she says, gosh, I didn't realize how far I've come since then. That was a real confidence builder for her. Definitely, to have that opportunity. So that's important. Do you have any luck with any of those pictures? Yeah, she's like, I'm working on it. I
Miss
can't see
Jennifer,
my screen, so that's why I don't know. Let me go down further and see if it's on the
Miss
screen.
Jennifer, we had a question come in that
Yes.
requested you talk about the expression on a youth's face when they're showing in hand or when they're riding.
That's a really good one. Because how many of you have seen people that are out there that like have the pasted on smile? My mother would always say, stop pasting that smile on, We like to see a natural expression, and someone that's happy and enjoying what they're doing. There's some of us out there, and me included, that I get my game face on, so I look kind of serious. And I'm not trying to bite anybody's head off, but that's just what happens. So I think if you have a natural, relaxed demeanor, you go in that ring and you have a soft smile on your face because you're confident and you're enjoying yourself. I think that does put you at an advantage in any class, really, especially when you're being judged. If it's on you, showmanship, horsemanship, equitation, something like that. But even in the classes where the horse is judged, if you look happy, you're telling me that that horse is fun to ride and you're having a good time. You might be doing 20,000 things to make that horse look good. But if you have that happy expression, that means you're enjoying yourself and you're having a good time. Like Kelsey does when she rides Moose. And I'm sure you guys know Moose. Moose is like the poster child for Area North. We love him. All right. Hey, here we go. We got some good stuff to look at. If you guys can't see me, you're not missing anything anyway. So we're looking at a really nice picture of a hunter under saddle horse here. And this being the stock type horse, yes, this is at WEC, so it's in our backyard, but it gives you an idea on, style of horse. And I want to talk about with this particular individual, this whole body. And many of you have heard, the expression both in Western Pleasure, Hunter Under Saddle, all the horse classes where the horse is judged, the phrase headset. And it's just something that pops out of our mouth because many people believe that these classes are judged on where that horse's head is. And if I had $1 for every time I hear that in oral reason, then I just chuckle. The position of the head is important because it dictates a relaxed horse that's easy to ride. But I want you to focus on a couple more things in this picture. One, obviously this is a trot, look at that spacing between those diagonal pairs. Remember, the trot's a 2-beat gait. So we should have a nice split, if what we call, of the diagonal pairs, or a diagonal split. And this horse is really pretty even. He's a little bigger in front, which means just a hair on his forehand, right? But we can really see a nice split there. I also want you to notice the top line, right? And that being his spine from the point of his poll or his ears all the way back to the point of his hip. It's nice and level. Right, and his head is just a hair low, but I think also that's part of when this picture was taken. He's in the downward part of beat 2, but it's a nice natural picture of a hunter. Right, this horse is covering a lot of ground. He's pushing off his hocks, nice and free. He looks nice and relaxed. His tail's swinging, and obviously his ears are forward. So I think when you look at your own horse and your horse's performance, these are questions that you can ask yourself as an exhibitor. But you can also ask the judge when you want to improve and you have the opportunity to talk to the judge about your performance. These are the kind of things you're looking for. Does my horse need to be in a different frame? Do I need to ride at a little different speed, a little slower, a little quicker? Do I need to collect a little bit more? Things like that. These are the positives and the negatives that we're looking at when the horse is being judged. But I really like this picture because it is a good picture of natural trends in the stock horse. And it shows a horse that's really balanced and really likes what they're doing. And I don't know this person. Once again, I always do the disclaimer. If you put a picture online, it's wide open to be used. So I'm sure I know this person indirectly, but I don't personally know the horse. But I really found this picture to have a lot of eye appeal. It's just a pretty shot. So are there any questions on this horse? Well, we got him up here. I'm going to go back to him one more time. Anybody have any questions on him? No, go ahead and let me go back over to our faces. There we go. I'm learning how to use this technology. I always just yell, I need a college student, All right. And of course, remember, there's 2 different classes of hunt seat. All right. And in our 4-H program here in Florida, we use Hunter Under Saddle. We have Saddle Seat Pleasure as its own class, and it's pretty much gone now from the program, unfortunately. But English Pleasure, you will see at some open shows, that's a different class. And I think this is where I'm going from here. If you guys have questions about things, almost always, I'd say 90% of the time, your question can be answered in the rule book. How is the class judged? What tack is legal? What is the judge looking for? It's right there in my book. That rule book is my Bible. And like I just judged in Polk County here this past Saturday, I walked in, first thing they did was hand me my new book for 2023 with my name on it. And they're all smiling and giving me a hard time. But it's true for you guys too. Those books are your Bible. And if there's something that you feel like you're missing, that's what you need to go to. Go to that rule book. And whether you have a hard copy of something saved in your laptop, or you have it saved as a link. I've got it as a link on my phone, so when I'm walking around, if I need to look something up, I can just hit the button. That's important. So with our English horses, remember, we have those 2 classes. We have Hunter Under Saddle, right, which is the ideal horse that's going to go jump a jump, right, and gallop across fields chasing foxes and do jobs. English Pleasure is the English horse that's fun to ride, that's steady and broke and not fancy. Right. Okay, well, here's a good question. Where's a good place to find the rule books? The link for the current rule book is on UF's current page. So if you go to the University of Florida 4-H horse and you scroll down, it's available on its own page, and it's also available on the page for horse shows. So you will see the link there. They are working as well on, and I know, here we go, Kelsey's going to love this, their bits and tack guide They are updating it because the one we had was old and we needed a new one. So the old one is still posted and it's fairly accurate, but there's a few changes. But if you need to look something up quick, that's also still on there. It's just buried. I had to go find it the other day because we had a funky bit at a show I was judging. So you can find that there as well. If you guys want to fall back on the rule books that are beyond Florida, what are our rules based on here in Florida? Look up American Quarter Horse Association. Anyone can look at that AQHA rule book, and it is actually an app. So you can download it again on your phone, on your laptop, on however you want to do it, and it's free. And we follow AQHA as our guideline rule book here in Florida. And that is now true for all classes, including over fences, hunter, everything follows AQHA here now. So that's a good fallback. If you can't get your question answered in our rule book, go to AQHA. So any more questions on that, on rules? And AQHA's book is like super deep. So like make sure you have a good energy drink or a cup of coffee or something when you get into it because it's really deep. I just work here. I don't write that stuff. No. So what do you see if you got another picture? Let's see what else you can come up with here. I'm gonna go back over. Here's a good one. So let's talk about showmanship. The trends in showmanship. This is a great picture because this is from Youth World last year for AQHA. But this is a great picture because it shows exactly what I want to talk about. And that is, it does not take $1 million outfit to be a winner, right? You guys can see this gal's dressed in just a real nice, simple suit, right? Really nice, well-shaped hat, well-fitted hat, good boots, right? Horse is shined up, banded up, looks like $1 million, right? And so appearance is truly everything. You know, you need to be turned out well. I think if anyone makes two fatal errors in showing horses. One is you're not prepared and that you haven't practiced or put your time in. And two is that you haven't put the time into your appearance, right? That horse is clean, is well groomed, equipment fits properly, and obviously is legal for the competition. Your attire fits properly and is neat and orderly. You can't see it real clearly in this picture, but I do want to emphasize her hair is up off of her back, right? It is actually in a bun above her collar. And I'm as guilty as the next person. I have a massively long ponytail, but guess what? It goes up in a bun above my collar when I show. So you guys want to be thinking that your hair should always be neat and contained. If you're in an event where you're being judged, you're not running in speed, right? Or anything like that, that hair should be nice and neat. Whether you're wearing the number on your back or you're not, you know, we want to see that hair nice and neat. Yes, that's a good comment. Somebody's talking about wearing helmets. That would be true as well if you're wearing a helmet. You should still have that hair up nice and neat. And actually, I found it's easier to do it with a helmet than it is with a Western hat because you can kind of bundle it up and you can use a hairnet if you wish or not. But it goes under the back of that harness really nice and neat. Right. So that's important in terms of your presentation. The suit that she's wearing, again, just a nice color. It's conservative. Right. You don't have to wear anything too crazy. If your horse is bright and shiny like this pretty bay, you know, it goes really well with what she's wearing. Also, make sure everything fits right. I mean, it seems so simple, but you know, what you might have worn last year may not fit this year, right? Jacket might be too short because you grew. Your pant legs might be up around your ankles because you grew, right? And so now your boots are hanging out with your pants too short. Those are all important things that judges look at in terms of presentation. If you're a hunt seat person, gloves are not required, but I will tell you in classes where you are judged, such as showmanship and hunt seat equitation, they're nice because they hide movement of your hands. They clean up your picture, right? And they make a more finished look. So I always recommend, you know, if you're a hunt seat person, if you're in a class where you're being judged, I highly recommend that you wear them. I'll tell you, all my customers over the years have always worn them. So that's something to consider as well. Does anybody have any questions while we're looking at showmanship about clipping? There's always discussions about that, what has to be done, what you don't have to do. Remember two things. What environment does your horse live in, right? Are they living in a barn under a mister and some fans? Are they living out in a pasture with a shelter? You know, what are they living in? Clipping, you want your horse to look neat and orderly, just like you do. But keep in mind what our rules state, that you do not have to remove hair that is provided to the horse for protection. And our judges do all know that when they're coming in and judging 4-H. They know this is not the Quarter Horse Congress. We're not showing horses that live in a square box 24/7, right? We have horses that live outside, trail ride, do other things besides show. So the things you want to do, you want to remove any long hair that's obtrusive, right? Long fetlock hair. You want to have a bridle path that's trimmed enough for the bridle or the halter to sit on neatly. This includes ranch, right? We still support the removal of a bridle path in our ranch horses. Any kind of long whiskers that are really long, but leave some protection if you wish. And with ears, we just suggest that you take that ear, you cup it closed, and you remove the long hair that's extending beyond where the ear is cup shut. All right, and that's going to make that ear look nice and neat. The horse is still going to have that hair for protection on the inside of their ear from all those little no-see-ums and gnats and fun things, right? And you're going to fulfill all the requirements that are needed for showmanship. All right, so is there any questions on that? There's always questions to me about clipping, and we show very high level halter horses in my business, and we clip them that way because we have to, because it's what our industry demands. But I would never expect any of you guys to have your horses clipped like that. Right, it's a whole different environment. Our horses live in a box that do halter. So, oh, I see a question there. Go for it. Got her hand up.
So I was wondering if it's acceptable to do different kinds of clips aside from like a full body clip, which is pictured in this horse. Like, would a body clip or a hunter clip ever be acceptable, or should the horse just be clipped all over?
I think, and are you showing like a hunt seat horse specifically, or all kinds of?
Myself, I'm just wondering for just in general.
Okay, it's a good question. I will recommend, if you get to the situation, and yes, we live here in Florida, where a body clip is necessary, I would do a full clip. I wouldn't do a partial, just because it's going to be a neater appearance. While we are all familiar with the different clips, I will tell you, if I came in here as a straight-laced Western person, I would be totally confused by a zip clip or a trace, right? But I am from Northeastern United States. I am from New York, and we know about all those things because we do them. And in college, we learned how to do them all correctly and got graded on that. Kelsey will love that. So I still remember doing my zip clip. So that said, I would do a full body clip. And keep in mind, if you're going to do that, make sure you do that as far out from the horse show as it will allow, because this way you have time for that coat to kind of settle and adjust, and for that oil to come back into their hair, all those things. So if we're going to body clip, we try to do it at least 30 days before we're in a horse show. Right. And I did have two that I did that we just took to Clarkona for the quarter horse show this past weekend, and we clipped them around Valentine's Day. So it's been like 30 days since they were done. All right. That's a good question though, because sometimes you don't have a choice. They're just not shedding enough, and it's hot and they're dying, and you want them to look slick and neat to go horse show, and it's just the best choice for you. Right. So like if you guys were thinking you wanted to go, you're going to area, in May, and your horse just wasn't shedding out enough, I would say, by Easter time, that's when you would need to clip by body clip at the latest to be ready. So that's a good question. Thank you for asking. I like it.
Yeah.
Any other questions on that? Banding and braiding and all those things, that's entirely up to you as an exhibitor, what works for you. If you show an all-around horse and you show Western and Hunter and everything all in a day, your best bet is to just go ahead and braid them, because we prefer to see a braided. This is a crazy thing, but remember this, it's important. This is trickling right down from quarter horse. We prefer to see a braided horse in Western versus a banded horse in Hunter. Okay, so I'll repeat that again. We prefer to see a braided horse in Western versus a banded horse in Hunter. Okay. So, and I will get your question here in just a second. So if you're going to a show where you're going to do all those different things in a day, a single day horse show, and you have a nice hunt seat horse that you also show Western, you should go ahead and braid them. All right. Now, of course, area is different because it's like boom, boom. I mean, there is that jumping back and forth from ring to ring, but I know at area, you guys are kind of streamlined focused on what you're going to do, one discipline or the other. What was that question there? I had one down at the bottom. Beatrice.
I was just wondering about ranch classes. I know they kind of prefer a long mane, but there probably aren't that many instances where you're doing ranch and hunter. But if you were, what would be the best way to do for that? Is there a kind of braid that is acceptable in ranch, or should you just be looser? Sorry, I'm not very familiar with horse showing. I do a lot of ride, but
that's really a good one. So for ranch, the mane has to be down in a natural state. All right. So because picture your horse going through the woods and through, all over doing jobs, which is why they want it in a natural state, which is also why we want that tail to be in a natural state. I know 4-H is already somewhat against any kind of extensions in the tail, which I totally get and agree with in many ways, but we don't allow those as well. So what you would do, let's say you had this nice pony, you were going to show it area in Hunter and in Ranch. I would have the mane grown out, and when I had to go to Hunter, I would quickly throw a running or a French braid in and a forelock braid, which I showed Arabs for a lot of years. I can throw one of those babies in about 5 minutes or less if necessary. So I would show with that running braid and the forelock braided. And then when I went over to the ranch pen, I just pull those out. I wouldn't do anything in the tail. I would just leave the tail as it is, just brushed out nice and clean and neat. But yeah, I would braid the forelock and I do that running braid. And again, it's basically a French braid. It's real easy. If you practice, you can be like me. You can do it really fast. All right. Does that make sense? Yeah. And remember, guys, too, do not do winglish. It's my mother's famous quote, winglish and hunt seat and whatever. Winglish. If you braid your tail in hunt seat, you must braid your mane. Okay. It is actually a disqualification if you show a horse with a braided tail without a braided mane in showmanship. Okay. So if you say, I love braiding the tail, it looks beautiful, I can do a good job, you have to do the mane too. Right. And if you choose to band, you are a Western pleasure person and you can do killer bands because some people can, and your horse looks like $1 million with all those bands in. If that's the case, then the tail must be left natural because now we're playing winglish. If we try to band our mane and do an English tail, now we've combined discipline. Okay, and again, if I only had $1 every time I see that all year round, I have to go through and teach kids you can't do both. So you got to figure out what you want to do, right? One or the other. Are there any questions on that, you guys? Right, and as far as feet go, in ranch, we want a natural foot with no polish. In Hunter, we kind of lean the same way. So this is what I suggest. If you are a hunter person, use oil, right? Or a little Vaseline for showmanship. Oil those feet. And then by the time you leave the pen and showmanship, your feet are already clean from the dirt. The sand has done a good job removing all that. And you're ready for ranch. It's just much easier that way. And I've had clients go to some big youth shows where all 3 divisions are going at the same time. And these shows allow you to cross over. So we're doing Western showmanship, ranch, and hunter at the same time. And I will tell you what, that's what we do. We just oil the feet for every class. We don't use any polish at all. We just oil. And always put more on if you need it. Right? Good stuff, right? Like dressage, Kelsey, do oil. Don't they do oil on those horses? I think so. Yeah. Not my area. So so let's go. I'm gonna go back to my other page. Let's put another picture up. Grab me something else. So this is a good one. I actually had these pictures, these stock pictures in my phone because these were pictures that we were choosing some outfits for some of my clients for halter. And this is just, again, another stock picture, but a great shot of just a nice pair dressed in stuff that you could find locally. I mean, it's just a nice blazer, contrasting collared shirt, trousers, boots, and yes, she is wearing a Western hat in this picture, but it just gives you an idea that you can just make a nice look without spending a whole lot of money. And the horses turned out beautifully. I'm sure Kelsey has talked a lot about body score and physical condition. This horse is just super, just perfect, right in the middle of the range, got a nice amount of muscling, not too heavy. And I would say as a judge, I see more horses that are overweight than I do under, which neither is good for their health. So, you're looking for something that's in the middle here. And if you guys are putting your time in and you're riding and they're healthy, you're caring for them properly, they're going to fit up. It doesn't take, a high-end professional to condition a horse and get them looking good. You guys can do that just with good health care and with the right conditioning, which is what we see here. This is also a nice example of a horse that's set square. We talk about in showmanship, the horse needs to be square, and this is a what's hot type thing, current trends, if you will. If you're showing showmanship, and this could be Western, this could be hunter, this could be ranch ground handling, speed ground handling. These are the setups that we're looking for. We're looking for that horse to be square on all 4 feet. Okay, and even hunt seat kids, I want you guys to be thinking that this is the setup that we're shooting for. Right? If you show any of those disciplines, and many of you do more than one, This is the setup that we're looking for. All 4 feet square underneath the horse. All right. And I will tell you that when you come into any of those classes, including ground handling, if there's an inspection in ground handling, which some of those classes do have it, I know you guys have had to do it. If the horse is not square, right? If the feet are open or not straight, like we see in this picture, you're going to get a minus score for your maneuver score on that maneuver, right? Because you aren't set up to the standard. Oh, that's an easy thing. You guys can all practice that. That's a rainy day in the barn kind of thing, working on setup and those feet being square. Easy way to get credit. And remember, in showmanship, as well as ground handling, we score from a -3 up to a +3 in scoring, right? So you could, in your inspection, if you're performing the quarters properly and your horse is set well and you're clean and neat with your movement and you're alert and attentive, there's no reason you can't get +3 on your inspection. All right. So that's important. That's a big one. And I love to give out +3 in inspection. When somebody's really sharp and snappy with their feet, they're looking me in the eye, the horse is alert but relaxed, the feet are in the proper place, etc. That's all, it's wonderful. I love to get, and judges love to give out good scores. Don't think that judges are evil and angry and like want to fail you, right? We wouldn't be doing 4-H if we didn't enjoy what we were doing. So, you want to go for those big scores. Definitely. Any questions on that? That's pretty simple. That's just a good stock picture. All right, let's see what else you have. Pick me another one. Here's a good one. So yes, I said to Kelsey, I said, well, we're always shopping for tack and equipment. This was on my phone. This bit is a very common offender for not being hung on the bridle properly. Okay, it is what we call a snaffle mouthpiece, right? Because you guys can see it's a flexing surface, right? We have a joint in the middle, but it has a shank mouthpiece, okay, which means you have leverage. All right, when you combine the two, this means that this bit must be ridden one-handed. Okay, this is a neck reining appliance. This bit is not meant to be ridden with 2 hands. And I'll have people come up to me and say, well, I'm riding in a snaffle. Well, yes, it's a snaffle mouthpiece, but it has curb action, right? Your curb chain or strap is going to hook to the very top ring, the same ring your cheek piece hooks to. Okay, those little rings on the side throw people all out of whack. All right, and those are there to actually balance the bit. I've been really lucky. I've had the opportunity to work with a lot of different bit makers over the years, and I've actually had a really close relationship with Dale Myler over the years, and we've talked about bits, designs, balances, uses, etc. Those rings balance that bridle. All right, that's why those are there. So when you put this bit on, if any of you use anything like this, the cheek pieces and the curb chain or the curb strap hook to that top ring. Okay, and then of course your reins to the bottom ring. Right? So just remember with curb bits, like this one, if it has a jointed mouth or a snaffle mouth, yes, it is a snaffle mouth, but as long as it has leverage, it is a curb bit. Okay, are there any questions on that one? And this is actually a really nice transitional bit. We'll use this one. The reason I had this one up, I was talking to a client. We have a coming 3-year-old that we're transitioning out of a Bozell and a snaffle into a shank. And this is the bit that we actually transitioned her to and showed her in at Clarkona at the Quarter Horse Show. So are there any questions on this one? And that's a nice bit to have around. That's a very mild bit. I mean, again, bits are as severe as the hands that hold them, but that's a really nice mild bit for any of you to use for a lot of different things. And then of course that is legal in 4-H, the one you're seeing there. All right, so what else you got? Let's see what else you got. Patterns. So patterns. This is a big topic of conversation lately. So patterns. This is an example one for horsemanship at a show that I had customers at a few weeks ago. When you have opportunity to get your patterns, every show is a little different. Right? If you guys are going to go to a weekend open show, you can probably see the patterns online maybe 2 weeks before the show. If you're going to area, and Kelsey, just correct me if I'm wrong on this, they don't see them until they get to the show and get their packet. Is that right? Okay. So that's when it's like, yeehaw, gung ho, let's throw the cones on the ground in the yard and outside the arena and work on the patterns, right? So whatever amount of time you have to practice, it's important that you do give time to your patterns, but you don't drill them. right? I think a lot of people make mistakes that they drill them over and over and over. They set the cones up and they run. Oh, it still wasn't very good. I'm going to do it again. Oh, it still wasn't very good. I'm going to do it again, right? We teach our horses to anticipate. And by the time you get to the show ring, that horse knows the pattern better than you do, right? Because you've run it how many times. So with patterns, it's important that you understand first, how do you like to learn? Do you learn better visually? Do you learn better doing? Right? Do you learn better if I just take those cones and set them in the street outside the barn up there at Green Cove Springs and you run them on foot first and then you get on your horse and ride them? Do you better just look at the picture and say, okay, set it up. I want to practice. Know what works best to learn them first. Secondly, practice all the elements, right? What's in the pattern? There's a back, there's a jog, there's an extended jog, there's a lope, whatever's in it. There's a canter, there's a posting trot, whatever's in the pattern. Know that you can do all those things on the rail first, and then take those things and put them on the markers, right? And the third thing, set your pattern different sizes, right? How many of you have been to a horse show where you practice the pattern at home and you get to the show and you go, oh my gosh, that's tiny. You know, I might get 3 strides of canter in there, right? So practice at different sizes, right? Smaller, larger, you know, refining your transitions, making your turns tighter or bigger. If there's a circle in the pattern, this one does not have that. But if there's a circle in the pattern, make that circle truly round with shape. Make sure your horse is bending in the correct direction. All right. All those things that are going to earn you credit. Right? And then, and lastly, of course, when it's time to go horse show, when you're ready to show, if the judge gives you the opportunity to ask questions, do. Right? We are out there to make sure everybody can do their best job. Right? We're not out there to throw darts at you and disqualify everybody. That's not what we're out there to do. So ask questions, right? Go to your judge. And when your judge lines everybody up at the gate, and I do this, and I know many of my peers do also, and says, are there any questions on the pattern? Don't be afraid to ask questions. Even if it's like you've practiced this pattern since Friday, it's now Saturday afternoon at area, and you have to show it, and you go, oh, my gosh, I can't remember what side of the cones this was to be on. I just drew a complete blank, right? Ask. It's a simple question because there might be 5 other people standing there with you that have the same question. Right? And I will say to the adults that are listening to this, it's unfortunate, but there's parents out there that feel that if their kids ask questions, we're going to judge them on that they're not knowledgeable or somehow they're not prepared to show. And that is a total mistruth. That is not true at all. We want everybody out there to be prepared. Do not feel that your kids are at a disadvantage because they're asking questions by any means. So that's really important. And we've been seeing that a lot. Several of us judges have discussed that we feel the kids feel that they shouldn't be asking anything because they've been told not to. So ask, always ask. And no question is a dumb question. All right. So are there any questions on, speaking of that, are there any questions on the pattern stuff? All right. And again, you guys will have patterns chosen based on, here we go back to the rule book, what tests are available to you in the rule book. So if you're showing in, let's say, senior hunt seat equitation, if you get to the rule book will say judges can choose from the following, right? Posting trot on either diagonal, canter on either lead changes, turns on the forehand, backing, circling, etc. All those things are in the rule book. So you might say, well, you know, I'm not going to get to see the pattern area until Friday. Well, all the things that I can choose from are in that rule book. So if you've taken that rule book and you've worked on all those little different things in there, you've really prepared yourself for just about anything the judge is going to ask you to do. All right. And that's been that way since I was your age, everybody. It's always in the book, right? So if in doubt, you know, don't feel you're at a disadvantage that you won't see that material until that Friday. Go through that book and make sure you can do all the tests that are in the book. And that's true for ground handling, showmanship, horsemanship, equitation, all those classes. Okay, are there any questions on that? I love that they do that too. And Florida's is one of the best in terms of that. And I will just tell you, Kelsey, the other states don't provide that much material. It's nice. And it's always been there since I can remember. All right, so let's go back over. Let's take one more here. I have another one. All right, another example of trail. This one is a ranch trail pattern, again, from a show we were attending. When you're talking trail, and I will tell you guys, trail is the most fun to show, whether you're showing regular trail, you're showing ranch trail, whatever trail class you're showing in. I really enjoy it as an exhibitor and as a judge. And I think it's an excellent class to broaden your skills, show off the level of connection that you have with your horse, and show me too how well broke your horse is. They're courageous, they're smart. Here's an example. Actually, go to that one. All right, you go to that next slide. So this one's at a client's house of mine here in Ocala, and this gal is famous for setting up great grids. All right, so we set up a little course that she was going to show a few weeks ago in her little arena here. So that's the next part of trail. If you are showing trail, know again what that can be asked: walk over logs, trot over logs, bridges, weaving through cones, backing, side passing, all those things, working a gate, which by the way is a mandatory obstacle. Don't forget, guys. So if you are showing trail, you need to be able to open and close the gate from your horse's back, right? Because that is a mandatory obstacle. So set it up at home. And so this is an example of course set at home. Know your measurements, right? All your measurements are in that rule book. Da-da-da, back to the rule book, right? It will tell you in there, a walk is 18 to 24 inches. A jog is 3 to 4 feet. A lope is 6 to 7 feet. That's all right there in black and white. That is the fourth most common mistake people make when they show. They don't practice the right size spacing for the class they're showing at home. Okay, whether that's trail, it's jumping, right? You know you're going to jump 2'3" at the horse show. You know the spacing between the jumps is 48 to 72 feet, but you jump cross rails at home and you put the fences, 20, 21 feet apart. It's basically an in and out, right? Whatever it is, you're not practicing the standard that's going to be required at the horse show. So then when you get to the horse show, you're like, oh my gosh, this is not what I worked on, right? So set that stuff up. Have mom and dad measure that stuff. And incidentally, this course is all set up you see here. These are all made with landscape timbers. These are all, I think they're 8-footers, but these can be bought at Walmart, in the garden center, at Lowe's, at Home Depot, any of those places. And we just painted them with white and red paint. Real simple, cheap to make. It's not going to cost you a fortune to put together something like you see in this picture. So know what's required. Again, know your measurements, and then set it up at home. Set up some examples, like a box. Like here, I've got a box. We did the box and then walk out. And then we had some jog overs, some lope overs. I had a little fan in the back corner, which is 3 poles on a diagonal angle that we loped over, right? Set up all that stuff and play with it and get comfortable with it, because that's 90% of show and trail. Having good cadence that fits the size that you're riding and being comfortable with it, right? Being able to walk and chew gum at the same time while you ride. So are there any questions on trail? And ranch trail too. Any of you, I don't know if we have any ranch people watching, work on all of those really fun things like dragging a log, right? If you're a senior rider in here, roping, which by the way, I kind of enjoy and I'm learning to enjoy more. Roping, right? Carrying a slicker, it amazes me, but so many horses get real spooky about something like that. Opening a mailbox, like old-fashioned trail stuff. Practice that stuff. And again, that's all in the rule book. All the different things that can be in your pattern are right there in that rule book to tell you what to prepare for. So any questions on that? All right, let's go back. Let's do one more slide. See what else you got in there.
That's all you sent me.
That's all I sent you. All right. Well, that's okay. This is a good start. And actually, we're at a good point in our time here. So I'm going to open the field up. Are there any questions on anything else that I didn't discuss, you guys? This was kind of like a crash course on judging and showing area. I don't know if I'm allowed to say this, but I will be at area in some form. That's all I'm going to say, because I don't know if I can be official with it yet. But anyway, when you are there, obviously approaching the judge is something that needs to be done a certain way with a steward present, but do not be afraid to do that. Also be aware, regardless of what your ribbons say, first, second, third, or nothing, whatever it might be, if it's a class where you performed individually, It's showmanship, it's horsemanship, it's ground handling. If it's a cow class, if it's over fences, whatever it might be, the judges' scorecards will be available for you to look at. And again, Kelsey is super with score sheets. So go and look at those. Look how you scored. And if you ride with anyone, you have a riding instructor, a trainer, a 4-H advisor, a dad, a mom, anybody that helps you, take pictures of that and take it home, not just for them to see, but to use to compare. Where were you this year versus next year? Or where were you at area versus state versus, yes, moving on to the big games up north in Georgia, right? Wherever you're going in terms of your competition. I have dozens and dozens of pictures of score sheets from customers in my phone. I can't even tell you, from all these different shows. And what we do, we video. That's a good dad job. Dad goes out and videos, and then after that, we get a picture of the score sheet and we look at the sheet and we compare it to what we see on the video. And it is a wonderful way to learn about what you're doing, what you can improve, what the judges saw on that day and liked, and what they didn't like so much, and what you can change. All right, that's a really big thing. And I know our judges that judge at the area level as well as state always have their paperwork available, so you can take a look at how you've done. So are there any other questions anybody has at this time or otherwise? I can't believe I have this much energy. I've been going since like 5. So we had a bunch we could get done today. Well, then I guess I'm going to turn it back to you, Kelsey, and let you take the reins back. I'll go flip one more page back. There we go. I'm learning about this technology. I'm getting better.
Well, we appreciate you, Miss Jennifer. So for those of you who haven't had a chance to meet Miss Jennifer in person, she has been an amazing judge and volunteer, not just at Area North, but just for 4-H nationwide. She's helped us do online challenges. She's helped us just answer questions. So another reason we wanted to bring Miss Jennifer on was to show all our youth that our judges are actually nice. So judges get that reputation. They have a job that they have to do. They are being paid to give their opinion, and they've put a lot of time and energy into being those experts. But that doesn't mean that they don't genuinely care about you and want you to succeed. So please ask questions and thank your judges, because even if you didn't have the best ride, you still need to thank your judges.
It makes it, and I agree with you. It makes a difference. Definitely. I agree with you. Thank you, Kelsey. Thank you so much. And this is what I enjoy the most. Everybody asks me, gosh, many people ask me every year, what is your favorite to judge? And I think they all say, oh, like last year I judged the Bucks King Congress. This year I'm judging the Congress for Gypsy Vanner. So I judge a lot of big shows, and I'll say Area North at Green Cove Springs. Or I'll say, any of those shows. This year I'm judging the state horse show for 4-H in Kentucky, Maryland, and New York. So I have 3 of them. Those state 4-H shows are the bomb, working with all you guys. The best kids in the state. It is the most fun. Superb volunteers like Ann here that keep the wheels turning and just make it a lot of fun. And you too as well, Kelsey. I make lifelong friends with the people that run these things. It's phenomenal. So I would say 4-H is where I started way back in the 70s. I joined 4-H in 1976. Yeah. So yeah, it's been a long time. And it's still the foundation of my career, and it's what I go back to. So you guys have a lot to be proud of. Do not feel that you are by any means at the bottom of the industry. You guys are the lifeblood and the grassroots of our industry, and we love you for that. We do.
Awesome. Well, and I will say, Ms. Jennifer is always really good about answering questions. So if, throughout the week, if you've been thinking about our talk tonight, or just maybe something you heard, rumors are real. And so I am happy to pass off those questions to Ms. Jennifer, and I know she'll be happy to answer them. So there's no dumb questions. So ask away as you're thinking about things. And if we get anything between now and Thursday's symposium, we'll make sure we bring up those answers so you can come back and hear more.
Great. Absolutely. So.
Well, thank you, Miss Jennifer. You're all good for the night now.
Sounds good. I'm going to have me a nice little glass of wine and relax and prepare, guess what? My teaching schedule for tomorrow. So that's my next thing, is it's back to work in the morning. That's the fun of the horse business, guys. You're always planning for what's next. So So enjoy the rest of your evening and the symposium, and thanks again for having me on. I appreciate it. Oh.
Well, all right, so we are now going to shift gears to our second presentation of the night. So we are turning it over to the Brooks Lab. So the Brooks Genetics Lab is a really amazing opportunity we have at UF that not everybody gets to say they have. And personally, I am also a genetics nerd, so I love getting to meet our team and what they're able to produce for not just our nation, but our international studies. So I brought on a few of our current lab workers and grad students. So we've got Miss Madelyn Smyth and Miss Barclay Powell, who is going to teach you all about the latest research and trends in our equine genetics industry. So I'm super excited for this one. Let me stop sharing mine. And then Madelyn or Barclay, which one do you want to be the primary presenter?
Can you give it to me and I'll screen share?
Yes, I can do that.
Thank you.
You're welcome. So you should be good to go.
Sounds good. Let's see if this works. Okay. Can you guys see the PowerPoint? Okay. A second here. Make it big. Okay, everybody can see the full screen. Awesome. Okay, so my name is Maddie Smyth, and I graduated with my master's degree under Dr. Brooks in December. So now I'm on the hunt for my full-time career. But tonight, me and then Barclay Powell is here as well. I'll have her introduce herself in a second. We are going to go over the basics of what genetics really is, and then we're going to go over some coat color genetics, and then both Barclay and I are going to share the research that we are currently doing in the lab. And then at the end we have a little quiz just for fun. It's more there to prompt questions from everybody and see if we can get a discussion going. If you have any questions throughout the PowerPoint, don't hesitate to ask them. We are more than happy to answer. Barclay, do you want to introduce yourself?
Sure. I'm Barclay Powell. I am a PhD student in Dr. Brooks' lab, and I'm working on some of the spook test stuff in the UF quarter horse herd, mainly genetics. So I'll talk about the spook test here around the end of the PowerPoint.
All righty, so we will kick it off. Maybe. Okay, so I am starting with a video. So if everyone wants to turn their sounds on, National Geographic made this, and it's the perfect genetics 101 to get us started.
Genetics helps us understand the biological programming behind all life forms. But what exactly is the science of genetics? And what does its future hold? Genetics is the study of heredity, the expression of traits and how they are passed from generation to generation. For thousands of years, humans have observed this inheritance of traits and implemented their knowledge to breed and domesticate plants and animals. However, the science behind inheritance was only starting to be understood in the mid-19th century. Around 1865, Austrian monk and botanist Gregor Mendel published the results of his hybridization studies of pea plants. In his findings, he noted the role of factors that influence the expression of traits. These factors later became known as genes. Each human has between 20,000 and 25,000 genes. This collection, called a genome, determines a person's traits by influencing factors on a cellular level. Genetic information is stored in every cell's nucleus. Structures called chromosomes carry this information in the form of deoxyribonucleic acid, or DNA. DNA is a double helix of nucleotides, chemical compounds composed of sugar and phosphate molecules, along with the bases thymine, adenine, guanine, and cytosine. These segments of DNA are what we call genes. And it is within those genes that chemical compounds provide the coding for all information about a person's inherited traits. Human cells contain so much DNA to carry this large amount of information that, if unraveled, the DNA in each cell would be over 6 feet long. At the turn of the 21st century, an international effort to decode human DNA was launched. Called the Human Genome Project, it ended up identifying about 99% of the entire human genetic sequence.
A revolution in medical science whose implications far surpass even the discovery of antibiotics.
Discoveries in genetics research have unearthed tremendous opportunities in medicine, such as genetic testing and the manipulation of genes. But with these opportunities come risks and ethical questions. And finding the answers to those questions may be the next stage of our understanding of genetics.
Alrighty. So I know this video was based on the human genome, but when we are looking at actual genetic techniques that Barclay and I use in the lab almost daily, all of these translate to just about any species. Dr. Brooks's lab mainly works with horses, but she's also done work with camels. She's been part of projects with honeybees as well as beagles. So all of the work that we do translates. So everything we learned in the video is accurate to horses. And I also want to say that there is a horse genome that has been sequenced. Barclay and I were lucky enough to meet that horse, Twilight. She lives at Cornell in Ithaca, New York. So she is still alive and around, and it's actually pretty recent that they sequenced the entire horse genome, which is really exciting because it makes our research much easier to have something to compare to. All right, so they kind of went over what a genome is, but again, the genome itself is the code of life. So everything your DNA is built to do, it tells your body how to function, the proteins that it needs to formulate, how you need to work. Everything for you to live is within your DNA. And with that, there's about 2.7 billion nucleotides within each strand of DNA. And the nucleotide is that single letter you see there. So there's about 2.7 billion of those, and each of those has its pair. So that's one strand of DNA is 2.7 billion, and then multiply that by 2, and you have your double helix strand, which is pretty insane to think about. And that is all bundled up into a chromosome. And horses have a total of 32 pairs of chromosomes. So they get 1/2 from their sire and 1/2 from their dam. And we'll go over that when we're looking at patterns of inheritance. And then with that, that video also touched on that there's about 20,000 genes in the genome. Surprisingly, those 20,000 genes only make up 3% of our DNA. So the other 97% is all of the instructions going into what those genes actually need to do in order to make your body function. So I think just trying to visualize that is very difficult. I think the pie graph helps a little bit, but that tiny sliver, that 3%, makes up those 20,000 genes, and each of those genes contain multiple, if not hundreds or thousands of nucleotides. Now that we've gone through all of the boring science stuff, we will turn it back over to horses. So first we need to determine the difference between a genotype and a phenotype. So when we're referring to a genotype, we are referring to what the DNA actually says. So this is something we can't see. We would need to get a DNA sample from a horse. Often we use blood or we use pulled tail hair. So in that tail hair, if you pull it directly from the tail or the mane, you'll see an almost white spot on the edge of the tail hair, which is called the bulb. And that is where we are breaking that bulb down in order to extract all of that DNA. So we need to go through that entire process to actually determine your horse's genotype for something specific, perhaps their coat color. While phenotype is looking at what the DNA says in addition to the environmental impact. So environment can change the phenotype, and we have this math equation that we go by in genetics, which is G for genotype plus E for environment equals your phenotype. And this is what we are actually seeing. So we're going to go over coat color. This will make a little bit more sense when we're deciphering between genotype and phenotype. But if I look at a horse and I say that's a gray horse, the horse's phenotype is gray because that's what we're able to see. And it's important to note that the genotype is not always the same as the phenotype. And that may be because there are various environmental factors that have altered the horse. So say the horse has a genotype that it should be very tall, but as a foal, it was malnourished and wasn't able to fully grow. So then their phenotype may be that they are a smaller, a medium-sized horse, where their genotype would say they're a large horse. This is very broken down, but this is the idea behind it. So we can't always guarantee that the genotype and the phenotype are the exact same thing. So then we need to determine what alleles are if we want to look at things like coat color. So alleles are referring to a pair of genes, and they can either be a heterozygote or a homozygote. So when we are referring to a genotype, we are looking at the allele pairing to determine what that genotype means. What are we going to see in that phenotype? So looking at a heterozygote, we have a funny visual here, but that is two different copies. So they're usually represented as a capital and a lowercase letter. So you're going to have two different alleles. Here we wrote capital A and lowercase a. Now, if you have a homozygote, that is two of the exact same copies of an allele. In this case, there is a dominant homozygote, meaning you have two capital letters, or a recessive homozygote, meaning you have two lowercase letters. That brings us in to our next slide here. So we have dominant, which is a capital letter, and we will learn that the gray gene is dominant over every other coat color except white. We will hit on that. But anytime you breed a gray horse to another color horse and they pass on their gray gene, that gene is dominant. So that baby will always be a gray horse. Now, when we're looking at recessive alleles, those lowercase letters, can anybody here guess which coat color, whether it be black or chestnut, is the recessive coat color? Yes, you can shout it out.
Chestnut.
Chestnut, you are right. So in order for our horses to be chestnut, they have to have two recessive alleles to get that red pigmentation. And that black coat color is a dominant coat color. So if a horse gets one chestnut gene and one black gene, they're going to be black no matter what. Does that idea, dominant versus recessive, make sense to everybody? Yes. Does anybody have any questions? I want to ask before we go into coat colors because it gets a little complicated. Okay. Okay, so now we are going to look at pattern of inheritance. So like I said earlier, the sire and the dam each give half of their genetic makeup to their offspring. So you can see here, the sire gives half of their chromosomes, the dam gives the other half, and then the foal is a combination of the two. However, the pattern of inheritance isn't always additive. So I feel like the best way to explain this is again by looking at coat color. So if you cross a black horse with a white horse, that does not mean you're going to get a gray horse. We are always going to look at those dominant and those recessive alleles, and there's a lot more terminology that goes into what genes are. However, dominant and recessive are the easiest ideas. We also have incomplete dominance, and we also have biallelic genes, which we'll talk about a little bit when we look at coat color. But I just want you guys to know that if you cross two horses, it doesn't mean that those two horses mixed together are going to be a perfect 50-50 split of the sire and the dam. So now when we're looking at patterns of inheritance, here we're crossing a dominant homozygote horse. You can see two capital E's to a recessive homozygote horse is two little e's. Every time you cross those horses, all of your offspring, all of those babies are going to be heterozygotes because they're always getting one dominant E from the sire or dam. I don't know which is which, but they're always getting one dominant E from one side and one recessive E from the other, which is what's making them a heterozygote. Does that idea make sense with patterns of inheritance? Okay, so if we take the same ideas and we look at two heterozygotes, you have a 50% chance each time whether you're going to get either a capital or a dominant allele, and then that recessive allele from each parent. So because of that, it breaks down to a 25% chance that your foal is going to get both of the dominant alleles from each your sire and your dam. You have a 50% chance of producing a heterozygote horse where they get a dominant allele from one parent and a recessive allele from another. And then you have a 25% chance that that offspring will get two recessive alleles, one from the sire and one from the dam. Has anyone done Punnett squares before? Yes? Okay, so Beatrice knows what I'm talking about here. She's done Punnett squares. For what we're doing today with coat color, we don't need Punnett squares as much because you need to know the sire and the dam's genotype. But I want everybody to see where these letters are coming from and that we're not just making them up for fun. All right, so now we're going into coat colors. So when I look at coat colors, we always start with those base coat colors. So we've got our black, our chestnut, and then we'll talk about bay. And that's because there's two major genes that control all of these colors, and we need a base coat color in order to look at all of the color modifiers, all of our spotting patterns. We always need to start at the base. So first, we're going to look at what's called the MC1R gene. And this gene is always represented with the letter E. So this gene is what's going to determine the pigment of the hair on your horse. So a dominant E is always going to give you that dark black pigment, and a recessive E is always going to give you red pigment. So we're starting with MC1R, and we're going to determine whether we have that dark black pigment or that red pigment. And in order for a horse, you can see here on the slide, to be a chestnut or a sorrel color, they have to have two copies of that recessive E allele. If they have one or more copies of the dominant E allele, they're always going to be dark no matter what. So now that we know our horse either has that black base pigment or that red base pigment, we're going to look at the agouti allele that works together with MC1R. And this is what's going to determine if your horse is truly a black horse or if it's a bay horse. So I see agouti as kind of like a switch, and if it's flipped on, or your horse has that dominant A, that's telling all of that black pigment spread out to just the points. And that's how we get our bay horses. Now, if that agouti allele is turned off, it's not telling the black pigment to go anywhere. And that's why we have solid black horses. So you guys are probably wondering, where do chestnut horses come in with this? Well, because they don't have dark pigment at all to start with, they're fully red. No matter what the agouti allele is, whether you have dominant or recessive, it's not going to change anything with that chestnut base color. Does that make sense for everybody? Yeah? Okay. Now we get into some fun stuff. So here are the genotypes of our base coat colors. First, we have our black horse. We know he's black because he has at least one dominant MC1R. We also call this the extension allele. So that means all of his coat color is going to be black. And that agouti allele is turned off. So it's not telling the pigment to go anywhere. We then have our bay horse, who again started out black, but that agouti allele is turned on. So it's telling all of that black pigment to just go out to the points, and that gives us a bay horse. And then our chestnut horse started out chestnut. He has no black on his body, so it doesn't matter whether that agouti allele is on or off, which is why you see dashes there. And our horse is just going to stay that chestnut color. Okay, so now we are going into the land of white horses. Can anybody tell me which horse is actually white? I think I have a chat. Okay, Emma said the first. Beatrice, what do you think it is?
I was also going to say the first. It's kind of hard to look at their eyes, but it looks like he does have dark eyes.
Yes, so you know the trick with the dark eyes. So our first horse is truly a white horse. And the way that we know this is Beatrice mentioned those dark eyes. We can also see that the horse has pink skin with white fur on it, and that the horse has dark eyes. So if the horse had pink or red eyes, what color would it be? Yes, Beatrice?
It would be albino.
Correct. So that is our difference between those horses with that pink skin color. So what color is our second horse then? He looks white too. Yes, Beatrice?
He's a fully grayed out. He's
Yeah,
a fully grayed out gray. Yeah.
you got it. Yeah. So our second horse is technically a gray horse. And we know that is different than our white horse because we can see he has a black kind of undertone. So his skin is actually black. If you were going to shave all of his hair off, you'd have black skin, which makes him gray versus our true white horse. So white and gray are important coat colors to talk about because white is considered dominant white. So if a horse has one dominant white allele, it will always be white. Even if your horse has all the alleles to make it bay, buckskin, dun, even gray alleles, as long as it has one dominant white allele, your horse is always white. Now, if your horse does not have any dominant white alleles, but it does have at least one dominant gray allele, the same thing applies. That horse is always gray. So when we're going down the list of importance of color genes, white is at the top, that dominates every other color. Then we have gray in second place. And then we're going to start looking at our base coat colors, which are black, bay, and chestnut. That's kind of how I work my way down the list when I'm looking at different coat colors. Can anybody tell me what color the third horse is? Beatrice?
He looks Perlino to me just because of his mane, but he could be Cremello.
He's technically Cremello, but I had the exact same thought. So they posted his genetic panel, which is why I know he's Cremello, but he does have those red undertones, which makes him look a little Perlino. So what we're talking about with these funny names, the Cremello and the Perlino, is actually a double cream dilution, which we'll go over further. But this horse's base coat color is chestnut, and he has two dominant cream alleles, which means he's diluted in color twice, making him that almost peachy cream color. I also want to point out that dominant white is considered a lethal color. We'll go over this with Frame Overo as well. So if they have two copies of that dominant allele, the foal won't even be born. It will usually die in utero. So it's very important that you're always color testing whenever you're crossing a sire and a dam that may be white or have certain color patterns, because you have a 25%. I take that back. I would need to do the Punnett square, but you always have a chance that if both the sire and the dam carry those alleles of creating what we call a homozygous lethal foal, and that is emotionally draining. It drains all of your money. So it's very important to color test your horses before you put your dam through that and before you put yourself through that. Okay, so now we're going to move on to color modifiers. I think these are fun. So all of these modifiers are on a bay base coat, and I just do this for sanity. But all of these color modifiers, except for a few that I'll point out, are able to happen on any base coat color that we talked about. So that's that black, that bay, or that chestnut. Remember, if any of these horses have a dominant white or gray allele, they're going to be white or gray. Okay, so first, we have dun. Can anybody tell me the difference between a dun and a buckskin? Beatrice.
A dun will have primitive markings, most notably a dorsal stripe. All duns have a dorsal stripe, no matter what kind of dun they are. And most will also have other markings such as spider webbing, ghost smiles, or leg barring. Whereas a buckskin, well, they may appear to have a dorsal stripe because they may have very dark counter shading along their top line. They will never have any primitive markings.
I think Beatrice needs to be Dr. Brooks's next genetics student. So she got the nail on the head. So you can see this guy in our bottom left corner. He has a very strong dorsal stripe. You can also see some of that leg barring. That is what makes him a dun. So he has that bay base coat color, and he has what we know of at least one dominant copy of the dun gene, which dilutes him down to that yellow color. So this can also show up on our black and our chestnut horses. So a black horse with the dun gene would be a Grulo. And then a chestnut horse with the dun gene would just be called a red dun. They're not as exciting with the name. Okay, so the next modifier we have is roan. So same thing here. This horse could have 1 or 2 dominant copies of roan. And it is a combination of pigment in the hair color that gives this effect. So this horse has both white and bay hair, which causes that kind of ticking pattern over their body. However, you can see around their face and on their legs and a bit over the hip, it stays pretty dark. And those are very typical characteristics of a roan. And we'll also see this in the blue roan form on a black base coat and the strawberry or the red roan form on the chestnut base coat. So next we have our silver gene. So the silver gene is actually only seen visually on bay and black horses. So chestnut horses can test for it if you're looking at their genotype, but you can't physically see the silver gene on chestnut horses. You can only see it on black and bay horses. And what it causes is this almost flaxen looking color in the mane and the tail. And it's also referred to as silver dapple because you may see dapples on the horse's body as well. And this is represented with the letter Z, I'm sure because the letter S was already taken, so that's why they switched to the letter Z. And again, we know that the horse has at least 1 dominant copy. We next have the pearl coloring. So I know this horse looks like a Palomino, but it's actually technically a bay pearl. And this horse, again, has at least 1 copy of that pearl gene. They almost have more of a shine to them than if they just had a cream dilution, which is like our buckskin horse over here. And earlier we talked about a Perlino versus a Cremello. So the buckskin horses only have 1 copy of the dominant cream gene. If you have 2 copies of the dominant cream gene, that's when you're looking at a Perlino horse if your horse's base coat color is bay. So that's why we know for sure buckskins only have 1 dominant copy of the cream gene and they have 1 recessive copy. Finally, we have the champagne coat color, and this color is very popular because it does have a very almost like a sheen or a glisten. It looks like somebody doused that horse up in show sheen before they took a picture of him. I've read some studies that say that the hair itself almost has like a translucent look to it, which makes them that kind of shiny, champagne-y color. However, yes, Beatrice.
I was just wondering if champagne horses may have a different hair structure, like with the occultakes, or if that can even be seen in pearl horses because they have the more metallic coat.
Right. Yeah. And the occultex, there's the occultiki. I've heard people say a few different things, but they commonly have that champagne color, and that's a common color dilution found in that breed. So it is something that I would have to look into personally. I haven't read a ton of papers on it. I come from the thoroughbred world and they just don't come in these colors usually. So we would have to look more at the hair structure, but I definitely think that is part of the reason why they are that like shiny shimmer. I just want everyone to know that these are only a few color modifiers. Horse coat colors are absolutely insane. And there are tons of other coat color modifiers. These are just ones that we would see more often than others. Okay, so now we are going to look at spotting patterns. So I know this is something that's very popular with paint horses. However, the typical look of a paint horse, the spotting pattern itself is actually called pinto, and that's because it can be found in a variety of breeds. So remembering that paint is a breed, pinto is the coloring. And then we're also going to look at some Appaloosa spotting patterns as well. So we are starting with splashed white, and Dr. Brooks and one of our undergraduate researchers, I don't know if the study's published yet, but she's done a lot of work. It should be published soon on paint coat colors and all of the variations of splashed white. So I put SW there as more of a placeholder, but I believe there are 6 splashed white genes and they're literally labeled SW 1 through 6. And your horse has to be genotyped to figure out which splashed white gene they have. I know Shelby did a lot of work in looking at how much white or what percentage of the horse's body was white and how that correlates to each specific splashed white gene. So once that study is published, I'm happy to pass that on to Kelsey if anyone's interested in reading it, because it is super interesting to read. But with the splashed white gene itself, it creates that look that the horse was almost dipped into white paint. We next have frame overo. It's also commonly known as lethal white overo. So you can see it as an O or LWO. So again, if your horse has 2 copies of the O, of the dominant O gene, it's considered homozygous lethal. So that means your horse usually doesn't even make it to birth. The foals often die in utero. However, if they have 1 copy, they have this beautiful coat color, and you can see that the white never crosses the spine in between the withers to the tail head. So that is the difference between frame overo and Tobiano, which we'll go over. And frame overo also has more irregular patching, and it seems like those white patches are actually framed into the base coat color. While the Tobiano horses have white that crosses their spine in between the withers and the tail head, and they have much more regular round shaped splotching all over their body. It is also possible to have toveros. It's actually possible to have any combination of all of these spotting patterns. And then we go into our Appaloosa spotting patterns, and there is a lot in the air with what actually causes blanketing versus leopard versus few spot. So there is the LP gene, which is what is very important to Appaloosa horses. So these are considered biallelic. So the PATN gene does not work without the presence of the LP gene. So they have to be a pair to work together. So horses are able to have that PATN gene, but without that LP gene, there will be no spotting pattern whatsoever. So we have to have at least 1 dominant copy of the LP gene in order to show basic characteristics of the Appaloosa, which is the white sclera, the modeling of the muzzle, and the striped hoofs. So if we have 1 dominant copy of the LP gene, and we also have a dominant copy of the PATN gene, that will likely, I say likely in bold, give us a leopard Appaloosa horse. And that's because these horses can express patterning differently, every single horse. There's actually a study that looked at the difference in how much white is on a horse. It gave a giant bell curve on the percentage of white of the horse. They all had the same genotype, but it's just kind of a wait and see game, see how they come out. So some horses come out as full leopard, some come out as blanket. They do say that there are multiple PATN genes. So I know of PATN 1 through 3. And they believe that all of these genes have different effects on what makes a blanket Appaloosa versus a leopard Appaloosa. But what I want everyone to understand today is that the Appaloosa spotting pattern has to have the presence of the 2 genes, the LP and the PATN, in order to show that spotting pattern. If you want to read more, I suggest Googling it because there's a lot out there. And then we also have our snow cap Appaloosas. So these are a little different. They just have that white, what looks like snow on their rump rather than having all the spots. And that's because they have 2 dominant copies of the LP gene compared to our leopard Appaloosas who only have 1. And they also have the presence of a PATN gene. So this horse, this is also how you would find a few spot Appaloosa. They have to have 2 dominant copies of LP and at least 1 dominant copy of PATN. And if that doesn't make it complicated enough, you can also have a Cremello leopard Appaloosa that has all kinds of color modifier genes and base coat colors, so it can get kind of crazy. Okay, so now we are switching gears completely. I'm going to give a brief introduction to what I've been doing with genetic diseases in the lab. And then Barclay's going to talk about what she's doing. And then we have a little quiz. I don't know how we're doing on time. Oh, we're doing good. Okay, so I am specifically looking at a disease called Fragile Foal Syndrome. Has anyone heard of it before? Beatrice has. So it primarily affects warm bloods. However, it has been seen in some stock type horses as well as thoroughbreds. So in warm blood horses, the carrier rate can be as high as 17%. So it's important to note that fragile foal syndrome, like our lethal white overo coat color, is a homozygous lethal disease. So any foal that has 2 copies of the fragile foal allele will automatically either die in utero or die immediately after birth. And that's because this disease is pretty horrible. So it impacts how collagen fibers are organized within the musculoskeletal system. So a typical horse without having this disease has very stringent fibers. So they're all right in a row, packed tightly together. They look very neat. And I'll show you guys an image in a second. However, horses with 2 copies of the fragile foal syndrome disease have very disorganized collagen fibers, and they're kind of sporadically placed all over the body. And this is due to what we call a single nucleotide polymorphism. We also refer to that as a SNP, which basically means one single letter, one nucleotide within chromosome 2 switched from a G to an A. That's all it did. And it caused this havoc. So this is an example of the muscle in a healthy horse in letter A. So on the left side there, see how tightly packed all of those collagen fibers are. And then if we look at letter B, that is a picture of a muscle biopsy from a horse that died from fragile foal syndrome. So you can see how disorganized those collagen fibers are. There's a ton of space between them. It just wreaks havoc on the horse's entire body. They have extremely stretchy skin, hypermobile joints. They're typically born with an open abdominal cavity, so their abdomen doesn't even close all the way while they're forming in the uterus. So this is why the disease is not livable whatsoever. However, we don't know anything about our horses that are carriers of this disease. We know they're out there. We know in the warm bloods there's a 17% carrier rate. We know in our thoroughbreds it's as little as 1 to 2%, but we don't really know how this disease affects horses. So this is an example of a Punnett square. You can see here if both the sire and the dam are carriers, they have 1 copy of fragile foal syndrome. You have a 25% chance of producing a normal foal, a 50% chance of producing a carrier, and a 25% chance of producing a homozygous lethal foal. And if you have a sire and dam and only one of the parents has 1 copy of fragile foal syndrome, you have a 50-50 chance of producing either a normal foal or a carrier. So it's only a major concern when you're crossing a sire and a dam that both carry the disease. So in order to understand how this disease specifically affects our carriers, we created a trained artificial intelligence model that tracks our horses while they're moving. And this is so we can test hundreds of horses. We need at least hundreds. We'd love thousands, but we need everyone to comply in order to get that many horses. To really understand the different joint angles, the limb lengths, the movement, the stride lengths, all of those pieces, and what's normal and what's not normal and what's due to the genotypes. So we used a software called Deep Lab Cut. It's a free software. It was originally made by Harvard University to test rat models. And we trained it to test horse models instead. So I hand placed all of these points you see on our horse in the bottom right corner on a small sample of frames. And then what's called a convolutional neural network took all of those frames, stacked them one on top of each other, and memorized where all of those points are supposed to go. And then once that model was trained, it knew where everything was supposed to go. We uploaded the hundreds of videos we had, and it automatically placed all of those labels on the horses for us. And then it produces coordinate files for every single point. And basically, we take all of those coordinate files, we smash them down into a big online calculator, and it spits out a bunch of gait parameters that actually make sense for us to look at. So we can look at things like fetlock angle, stride length, all of that. So this is an example of a video that has that artificial intelligence skeleton placed on it. This is what we're looking at on the computer itself. And then once everything goes through that back end processing, we are able to look at things here. So in A, we're looking at duty factor, which is a proportion of how much time that hoof spends in full contact with the ground. You can see it in that second picture with the orange arrows on it versus how much time it spends swinging in the air. We also look at how many full stride cycles a horse does within a video, how fast they are trotting in the videos, and then fetlock angle. And we're also looking at forelimb and hind limb swing to determine if this disease is truly impacting those horses. And this is something we're still researching. We're always researching, but we're hoping to have our manuscript published very soon so we can identify how this disease is truly impacting our sport horses and if it's even creating an advantage or perhaps it's a disadvantage, and everything that goes along with that. And now I'm going to hand it over to Barclay.
And we go a totally different direction with spooking horses for fun. So so with spook tests, what we do is we actually take the UF bred horses that UF uses for all their classes, and they produce every year, and then they sell after they're 2 years old. So with spook tests, we get to spook them twice before they leave our ownership at the university. And first time is right after we start handling them, and the second time is right before they get sold. Now, we also try to take them back to the umbrellas, so we're not scaring our horses of umbrellas for the rest of their life. But you guys will get to see a couple of videos of some very extreme different reactions that we have seen over the years. Oh, there we go. So we started this project, or I should say Dr. Brooks' lab started this project back in 2014. We started collecting each year 2 different sets. In the fall, we collect the weanlings, or for usually the 6 to 10 month old range on age there. So usually we do this right around Halloween, October 31st. And so it's fitting for spook tests, but this works really well because in the fall, we actually have these weanlings go through a handling class. So they get to begin to get haltered, be groomed, learn to pick their feet up, be used to people touching them all over. This way that they're starting to be handle broke. So in October, that's about halfway through the semester, it's enough time to get these horses used to being haltered and led around so they can be brought out to the round pen and caught after they're spooked, or, you know, just generally worked with, but not enough to really mess with them too much from an environmental standpoint with human influence. And then again, we do this after they've gone through P&T training and they have done their under saddle work. And we usually do this right around April Fools. So the beginning of April, we try to keep it on theme here, and it just happens to work out real well with the time frames. But these horses are usually sold at the end of April, beginning of May. So this is kind of our last opportunity for us to be able to work with these same horses over again. And the goal of this is that these horses have had a lot more human interaction at this point. They've been put under saddle, they've been worked around pins, they've kind of matured a little bit more at this point as well. So it's to try to see if there is that major difference between that weanling age stage where they have less influence from humans, and then the 2-year-old stage where they've had a lot more influence by humans. So the reason we do this, well, a couple of reasons. First of all, we think about animal and handler safety. Big one being that we've known that the horse has been domesticated for a long period of time. And so how is that domestication process influencing our modern day horses compared to maybe our ancient genomes? So part of that is animal and handler safety. We probably selected horses that were easier to work with. And then on top of, you know, things like coat color and other phenotypes that maybe were desirable, but the more handleable the horse, the more likely we were able to work with it and keep it in our lines. So that's a big reason. And today it's obviously a big reason since we have all kinds of different people working around horses, and they have an economic value, which makes spooky horses maybe sometimes more valuable for certain disciplines, but also maybe very, you know, terrible for a specific discipline. Something like therapy horses, you do not want something that's spooky. You want something that's going to be relatively level-headed, easy to work with, and be good to, you know, be gentle with maybe students that have mobility issues or, all kinds of different opportunities versus maybe a thoroughbred where you kind of want a little bit of that hotness. You want a little bit of that adrenaline out of that reaction to the stimulation. So there are those differences, and we need to see if there are maybe some selective pressures that are influencing those that are also found in the genome. And then, of course, breeding decisions, if you're specifically breeding for a specific discipline, maybe, or maybe even you're looking to breed a horse that you want to raise for yourself over a long period of time. Maybe you want to make a champion of some sort. Having those decisions can really influence how well that horse, how easily it is to train that horse, maybe, and a lot of other big impact factors if you're going to be showing that horse or doing something with a lot of intensity to it. So those are big reasons why this is a big deal to look into. So exciting part is that just last month we got a paper published. This paper is specifically looking at the phenotype development for startle behavior, because with startle behavior is a qualitative trait, which means that it's very hard to put a number to it, a specific value that's measurable. So the big thing is, to do genetic testing, you really need to have something that is a quantitative value, which means that there's a way to put values or numbers on actual data. And by doing that, or to do that, what we had to do is we had to take behavioral phenotypes, and we also took cardiac or heart rate measurements throughout the startle test or the spook test. And combining those actually allows us to develop a phenotype, which can combine them into a solid number that we can eventually use to compare to genetics. So in this recent finding in this paper, and kind of the phenotype that we've developed here to future genome work, what we found is that there are two different types of heart rates when that horse spooks. First, there is the accelerator that we would all assume, the adrenaline rush, your heart pumping really hard if you got scared or something like that. And then there are the other horses that kind of freeze. So when you think fight or flight, sometimes that like freezing nature is going to be kind of, that, wait a second, what's happening? Or you're going to have the other end of that spectrum where you're maybe swinging arms or taking off, or very extreme reaction, that fight reaction. So there you can see this actually in the heart rate data when you spook the horse, that there are some horses that have that immediate reaction to accelerating and the other ones that have that freeze reaction. And over here on the bottom right corner, you can kind of see where that spike in their heart rate data is right there. So that was right where the horse actually spooked in their heart rate reading. And it's pretty obvious how extreme of a difference that is right there. So it's kind of fun to see. So on the other end, so the first part was the cardiac data that we just talked about. So now we have to also observe the behavior data, because behavior is kind of how we have to categorize fear as well. So when we look at behavior, we record videos of these horses, which I'll show you a couple here at the end. Some fun ones to watch, but each video is analyzed by an observer. Usually these observers have to be trained in using a system and a program. And what they are doing is they're measuring the amount of time for certain behaviors. They're measuring the frequency, so how often a certain behavior occurs. And they're tallying all these things up for each horse during each experiment. So the top ones that we have here are latency. So that means how long does it take for that horse to spook when the umbrella pops and then return back to the feed pan, which is right there next to the umbrella. We have the proportion of time walking, spent walking. So that means how much time did they walk and how much time did they trot is the other one, while they're in the round pen. So not just the spooking part, but they have 5 minutes to return to that feed pan. And then we have the standing facing away. So do they just freeze and look for the gate and just try to look out the gate or find somebody outside? Or do they stand facing the umbrella looking at it, kind of curious of what it is, trying to figure it out? And then of course we have flight distance. So how far do they run in our contained area before they stop from that spook? So when we combine these two things together, when we combine the heart rate data with our cool behaviors, we see that there is a significant correlation between the horses that have an accelerator heart rate and also the ones that have a factor 1, which are these high fear behaviors. So you can see over here on the right, those bars for latency, that's a really big bar. So that's a high factor 1 value. So horses that had accelerator heart rates correlated strongly with high latencies. It's a lot of time spent facing away from that umbrella and also larger flight distances. So they fled farther from that umbrella. So you can kind of see this here in the visual aspect. So you have the latency to return, and then your flight distance, how far they go when they spook. And that's just kind of putting the picture together of what those phenotypes look like for you guys. So our next step with this would be taking that new phenotype that we just found, and then taking the genetic data from these horses, which we collect on all of our horses, and combining those two things. So we can run that phenotype data with the behavior and the new factor values that we found. And we can combine that and compare it to other genetic information, mainly from horses that we all study, and compare how those horses all differ from each other based on their phenotype on a genetic scale. So that's when we do a genome-wide association study. And in the image to the right, you can kind of see where there's that red box that kind of shows you that there's a significant hit right there in the genome. So that's kind of the basics of what we're looking for when we do a very basic scan like that. So we get to watch a couple of fun spook videos. Now, the videos are starting out with probably one of the most subtle spooks that we've had in the spook test over these last handful of years, 9 years, I guess it is now. And this first video is going to actually show you a horse from the very first year that they tested with, which is really cool. And as the videos go on, we will see progressively worse and worse. And then the last video is going to show you a horse that actually at one point was probably one of our more extreme ones, but tried to actually jump out of the pen because it wanted to be away from that umbrella so badly after that spook test. So that horse doesn't even move a foot there, which is amazing. This is a weanling, mind you. This is a horse that's about 8 months old. So this is not a horse that's had a lot of experience with, scary objects, things flopping around. These are all actually about that same age range. So that one's kind of like our medium, actually pretty decent reaction still. It gets surprised. It decides to spook, but then it realizes there's not a big deal. And goes back and actually investigates that umbrella right there. It's very curious now. So obviously that one's pretty extreme, but then this horse not only spooked pretty hard at that umbrella, but now really does not want to go back to it. And with some of these horses, they kind of like take a little while to settle. They may never return. Others, they wind themselves up even more, decide to freak out farther. And then here's one that was just absolutely done, had no desire to want to be in the round pen anywhere near that umbrella, wanted out. And this was a test that we had to end early because of this, actually, because this horse continued to do this and started to move the round pen. So this is probably one of our more extreme cases that we've ever really had. Most of the time they don't do this, but it's possible. So you have to be careful with these sorts of things, but that shows you how variable these horses react to the same exact object that they've been acclimated to. Oh. So now, I know we have 5 minutes left, but we can kind of run through these real quick. If you guys want to write answers in the chat, or if you guys want to just do it on your own, I don't know if there's anything that everybody wants to do specifically, but we've kind of gone over some of these, so I thought it'd be fun if you guys remember anything we tried to teach you.
Okay, does anyone know the first answer? A chestnut coat color is produced by which main gene?
Nice. We got some good responses already in the chat's coming up. Good job.
All right, so you guys are right. It's MC1R. So remember, that is our E gene, the extension gene that determines red versus black pigment. Okay. What about which mutation of the spotting patterns is lethal when a horse receives 2 copies? You guys got it. The lethal Oreo. Lethal overo is our concern. So make sure you're always genotyping your horses.
I was gonna say, I wanted to add a note to that a lot of the times those horses will also be born, but what happens is they're born solid white and they have no gut motility. So pretty much nothing moves internally, and so they slowly die. So most of the time those horses do have to be euthanized if they do survive it to birth.
Okay, what does heterozygous mean? Two different copies. You guys got it. Yeah, just like the goats, heterozygotes.
We had to try to trick you guys there with the pictures.
Okay. Is the chestnut coat color produced from 2 recessive alleles? Yes or no? Yeah, you guys got it. Do you remember what the recessive alleles are? What letters? Beatrice?
It would be lowercase letters, specifically for the chestnut, lowercase e's.
Yes, you got it. Well, I'm glad you guys got stuff from this PowerPoint. Okay, how many pairs of chromosomes do horses have? Yeah, you guys got it. They have 32 pairs. Alrighty. Okay, and then what is a genome again? I feel like this one's kind of a trick question. Okay. It's not a trick question, apparently. Yeah, the code of life. Depending on what you're talking about, it could be the code of life of animals, of beings. Okay. True or false? You can see phenotypes. Yeah, you guys got it. True. Phenotypes are what we can see. Genotypes are what we have to test for. All right. Okay, so this one's from Barclay's work. So true or false, horses with the accelerator heart rates in the spook test are significant. I did a horrible job with my grammar here. Are significantly correlated to fear behaviors. Okay, you guys said true, right? So our accelerator heart rates, they show all of those fear behaviors. I don't know what the decelerators do. Just drop down.
Unfortunately, there's not any significance found between the behaviors for horses that show decelerator heart rates. So pretty much it doesn't influence fearful behavior, or is not significantly correlated to fearfulness or to activity level.
Okay, I think this is the last one. What genotype do lethal fragile foal syndrome foals have if we were to test them? No one's gotten it right yet. I finally got you guys. Okay, so it's D. So they have 2 copies of the fragile foal syndrome disease. And because they have 2 copies, and those are 2 recessive copies, they are homozygous recessive lethal. So they have to have 2 copies for it to be lethal. If they have 1 copy, it changes something in the horse, but they live. We just don't know what it changes yet. That's what we're working on. All righty. I think that is the last one. Yeah. Does anyone have questions? I think we're like already over time.
It's right on 9 o'clock.
No, this was wonderful to have active lab researchers be able to talk with our youth. So definitely bragging on the fact that I do claim our area north kids are some of the nerdiest in the state, and I'm very proud of that. It really goes to show that we want to learn and we want to know what's new and exciting. So we absolutely thank you for spending your evening with us. Hopefully you've enjoyed your time as well.
It's fun. We love talking about all this stuff.